The great hall of Xyrian shone with bright crystal lights. Tall pillars lined the sides, and alien nobles in glowing robes filled the seats. They spoke in soft voices, their eyes fixed on the tall human standing at the center. Captain Elias Grant stood straight, his black uniform neat, his face calm, his hands behind his back at the far end. The golden throne rose high, and on it sat Queen Salvera, her long silver crown shining beside her. Lounging in a seat made of shimmering glass was Princess Leorona, known across the galaxy for her beauty and her sharp tongue. Her eyes were cold. Her lips curled into a smirk. She looked at Elias as if he was nothing. The court had been expecting the human to speak first, to bow, to offer gifts. But instead, Elias simply stood there, silent, his eyes steady. Leoruna's voice rang out. "Sweet but cruel. So this is the human envoy Earth has sent to our great kingdom," she said, her tone dripping with mockery. "I expected someone taller, stronger, perhaps even more intelligent." The court erupted in soft laughter, the sound echoing against the walls. Leorona did not stop, her words sharper now. "I have heard humans still live in metal boxes and fight over dirt. How primitive, how desperate, how small," she said, leaning forward slightly, her golden earrings catching the light. Her voice growing louder so all could hear. Some nobles laughed openly, others covered their mouths, hiding their amusement. The queen watched her daughter. A faint smile on her lips, she had seen many alien leaders crumble under her daughter's insults. They would try to fight back with angry words, and the court would tear them apart. Elias, however, did not move. He did not flinch. His eyes stayed fixed on Leorona. The room seemed to expect him to defend himself, to respond with pride or fury. But his face showed nothing but calm. Leorona tilted her head, curious now. "Have you nothing to say, human?" she asked, her tone almost challenging. "Do your people not teach you how to speak in front of royalty?" She laughed softly, the sound like a bell with a hidden blade. The laughter in the hall grew louder, voices blending into a wave of mockery. One noble in a blue robe leaned to another and whispered, "He must be afraid. Perhaps humans truly are." As weak as they say, Elias's eyes moved slowly, scanning the crowd. He saw their smirks, their sneers, their shining robes, their jeweled hands gripping goblets of silver. He looked back at Leoruna, his gaze calm and steady, and then, without a single word, he turned. The hall fell silent for a moment, unsure of what was happening. His footsteps echoed on the polished stone floor as he began to walk toward the great doors. His pace steady, his shoulders straight. The nobles exchanged glances, their laughter fading, confusion replacing it. No one had ever walked out of the royal court before, not without permission, not without bowing. Leoruna's smile froze. Her eyes followed him as he passed the guards. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words died on her tongue. The queen's brow furrowed slightly, watching the human's back as he approached the doors. The court had seen defiance before, but not like this. There was no anger, no panic, only choice. The guards at the door looked uncertain, their spears lowered slightly, but Elias walked past them as if they were not there. The huge doors swung open with a deep creak, letting in the cool night air. For a heartbeat, the only sound in the hall was the faint hum of the crystal lights. Every noble's eyes were fixed on the retreating figure of the human envoy. As he stepped out into the night, the silence in the great hall deepened. It was not the silence of victory for the princess, nor the silence of humiliation for the human. It was a strange, heavy silence, one that seemed to pull at the air. Leoruna sat back slowly, her fingers tightening on the armrest. The mocking words she had spoken only moments before now felt different. They hung in the air like smoke. One noble whispered, "Why did he leave like that?" Another replied softly, "Because he can." The queen's eyes narrowed slightly. She did not like what she felt in that silence. Something was wrong. The human had not been defeated. He had not been broken. Outside, Elias walked down the long, marble steps. The alien city spread out before him. Tall towers glowing with blue light, floating ships drifting through the sky. Alien eyes followed him from the shadows, curious and wary. He did not look back. His boots clicked against the stone as he moved deeper into the streets. The mocking laughter he had left behind was already fading from memory, replaced by the quiet, steady rhythm of his own footsteps. In the great hall, the queen finally broke. The silence, her voice calm but thoughtful. Send for him tomorrow. He will return, but deep down she was not certain. Lirona forced a smile, trying to dismiss the strange feeling in her chest. He was nothing, just a human, she said aloud, but the words sounded hollow. Around her, the court began to murmur. Again, but the tone had changed. The laughter was gone, replaced by a soft, uneasy buzz. The image of the human's calm eyes and silent departure would not leave their minds. That night, long after the great hall emptied, the princess sat alone by the tall glass windows, looking out at the alien city, wondering why a man walking away had made her feel as if she had just lost something she did not understand. The grand doors of the great hall closed slowly behind Elias, their heavy sound echoing like a final note in a song. For a long moment, no one in the court spoke. It was as if the air itself had been stolen from the room. The nobles sat frozen in their jeweled seats, their eyes still locked on the place where the human had stood only seconds ago. Princess Lirona shifted in her glass throne. The smirk that had danced on her lips now faded into a puzzled line. She tried to speak, but her voice caught. So she simply leaned back, forcing her face into a mask of amusement. "Well," she said lightly, "it seems our guest has no stomach for words." Her tone was airy, but the faint tremor in her voice betrayed something else. The court picked up her lead. Laughter returned, but it was weaker. Like a fire trying to relight after rain, nobles whispered to each other in voices meant to be mocking. Yet their eyes carried a different message: confusion, curiosity, and perhaps a thin thread of unease. One elder noble leaned toward another, his long fingers clutching a wine goblet. "You saw his eyes," he whispered, calm like the deep part of the ocean. The other nodded slowly, a man who does not fight back when insulted, either a coward or a predator who does not need to show his teeth. The queen sat silently, her fingers resting against her chin. She had seen warriors break under her daughter's sharp words. She had seen kings bow to avoid public embarrassment. But she had never seen a man-human or alien turn his back to the royal court with such deliberate calm. It was not defiance born of anger. It was the defiance of someone who did not care to prove anything outside the palace. Elias walked through the alien city streets, the cold air biting at his face. Tall glass towers reflected soft blue light. Airships drifted above, and alien merchants closed their shops for the night. The sound of his boots against the stone path seemed louder in the quiet. Behind him, in the court, the whispers grew. One young courtier asked, "Do you think he will return?" Another scoffed, "Why would he? We have insulted him enough." But an older, wiser voice answered from the shadows, "Because he was not insulted. He was measuring us." Lirona laughed when she heard that, though it was a little too quick. "Measuring us? He is human. His kind is barely beyond throwing rocks at each other," she said, her words sharper now. But they were meant as much for herself as for the court. She wanted to believe them. The queen finally spoke, her voice cutting through. "The chatter, send a messenger to his quarters tomorrow. Tell him he is invited to dine with the royal family." Her tone left no room for argument. One of her advisors frowned. "Majesty, after what he did." "Perhaps we should," but the queen's gaze silenced him. She was not used to being ignored, and she would not allow a human to make her court look foolish. Far from the palace, Elias reached a quiet docking bay, his small human transport ship. Waited there, its sleek black hull absorbing the light. Inside, the air was still and clean. He stepped in, removed his gloves, and activated the console. A faint blue hologram appeared. "Report," came a voice from Earth Command. Cold and precise. Elias spoke in his calm tone. "Engagement complete. Initial test successful." The voice on the other side paused. "You didn't say a word to them?" Elias allowed the smallest of smiles. Didn't need to, in the palace. The court began to break apart for the night. But the conversation was the same in every corner. Why had the human walked away? Some said he had realized he was outmatched. Others claimed he had planned it from the start. And a few, in low voices, wondered if Earth had sent him not to negotiate, but to observe. Princess Lorona sat alone in her private chambers. Her golden gown folded neatly beside her. She replayed the moment over and over in her mind. She had seen fear before. She knew what it looked like. But there had been no fear. In his eyes, only a kind of stillness that she could not name. It annoyed her that she was still thinking about it. The Queen, too, thought about the human as she removed her crown. There was something about the way he left it was not weakness. And that made it dangerous. She had learned in her years of ruling that the most dangerous players in the game were those who could walk away without trying to win in that moment, because it meant they had another move by midnight. The rumors had already spread beyond the court, in the taverns of the alien capital. In the dark corners of merchant docks, they spoke of the human envoy who stood before the princess, listened to her insult his species, and then turned his back without a word. They spoke of it with amusement, but also with a strange edge, because deep down, even those who laughed felt that the story was not finished. Back in the human ship, Elias sat at the small desk, his hand tracing over a sealed folder. Inside were classified mission orders. He read them again slowly, his calm expression never changing. Then he closed the folder and set it aside, leaning back in his chair outside his window. The alien city glowed under the night sky, unaware of what might be coming in the palace. Princess Lorona looked out from her balcony, the wind brushing against her hair. She whispered to herself, "You will come back." But she could not tell if it was a command or a hope. The stars above seemed to blink in silent agreement, and far across those stars, in the deep cold of space, something vast and dark was already moving towards Irian, answering the unspoken call of the man who had simply walked away. The night after Elias left the Great Hall, the palace was not as peaceful as it appeared from the outside. The crystal lights still glowed, the guards still stood at their posts. But in the hidden corridors, quiet voices carried secrets. In a private chamber near the throne room, a small group of advisors sat with the Queen. Their faces tense. One of them, a tall alien with deep blue skin, spoke first. "Your Majesty, I have been looking into this human envoy." His voice was careful, "and I have found something troubling." The Queen leaned forward, her silver crown casting shadows on her face. "Speak," she ordered. The advisor tapped on a glowing panel, and a holographic image appeared in the air. It showed Elias in a dark military uniform, his chest heavy with medals. "This man is not just a diplomat," the advisor said. "He is Captain Elias Grant of Earth Defense Command. His record is unusual." The other advisors leaned closer, their eyes narrowing. The hologram shifted, showing grainy footage of a barren red planet, alien beasts the size of buildings moving across the sand. This was the death world of Corvus 9. The advisor explained, "No one survives more than a day there." Yet Captain Grant led a team of 12 soldiers in a rescue mission, and he was the only one who came back alive. The Queen's lips pressed into a thin line. She had heard of Corvus 9, was a place where even machines malfunctioned out of sheer environmental hostility. "And after that?" she asked, her voice low. The image changed again, now showing a massive alien warship floating in space, its hull broken and blackened. 2 years later, he boarded the warship Raxel alone to retrieve stolen human technology and destroyed the ship from the inside. No survivors. One advisor shifted uncomfortably. "This man has been in more battles than some of our fleet commanders." The Queen stayed silent, her mind replaying the scene from earlier. The calm in his eyes, the lack of fear. It now seemed less like arrogance and more like certainty. Meanwhile, across the city, Elias sat in his small quarters inside the human ship. The room was simpler: bed, a desk, and a communication console. On the table lay a small metal device no larger than his palm. It pulsed with a faint blue light. He picked it up and tapped it twice. Activating a private channel, a voice crackled through. "Grant, this is command. Status." Elias leaned back in his chair. Observation complete. Confirmation on target culture. They respond to strength, not words. There was a pause. Then the voice replied, "And the princess?" Elias's eyes narrowed slightly. "She's prideful, smart, but careless with her power. She will make the first mistake." Back in the palace, Princess Lirona sat in her dressing room, her maids brushing her hair, but her thoughts were far away. She told herself she did not care about the human. Yet she kept remembering the way he had looked at her, not with fear, not with anger, but with something she could not name. She hated that it bothered her. Her chief maid, noticing her distraction, spoke softly. "Your Highness, the court is still talking about him." Lirena's eyes snapped to her reflection in the mirror. "Let them talk. By tomorrow, they will forget." But she knew that was a lie. The court never forgot someone who could not be humiliated. That night, while the palace slept, a message was sent from the Queen's private channel to the human ship. It was short and polite, but the meaning was clear. "Return to the palace at dawn for formal talks." Elias read the message in silence, then set it aside without answering. Outside his ship's window, the alien city was a maze of lights under the stars. Somewhere out there, he knew the court was already making their next move. In the Royal War Council room, the Queen's most trusted generals debated. Some wanted to push the human into a public apology. Others warned against provoking Earth. The Queen listened, saying nothing, until finally she dismissed them all. She would speak to the human herself, far beyond Xyrian, deep in the Black Sea of space. A massive human warship drifted in stealth mode, its hull absorbing starlight, its engines silent inside. Crew members monitored a single blinking signal. Location of Elias's ship. The captain of the warship folded his arms. "Stand by for orders," he said, his voice low. In the streets of the alien capital, word of the human envoy spread among the common people. They heard about his silent departure, how he had left the princess speechless. In the markets and tea houses, they whispered that maybe humans were not as weak as the nobles claimed. By morning, the tension in the city was thick. The palace guards doubled their watch. The Queen prepared for the meeting she had demanded, and Princess Lirona told herself she was ready to crush the human's pride. Elias, however, moved at his own pace. He ate breakfast alone in the quiet of his ship, his expression unreadable. The same calm that had unsettled the court now seemed to be building into something heavier, something deliberate, and somewhere in the back of the Queen's mind, a thought she did not want to admit began to take shape. Perhaps letting my daughter mock this man was the first mistake. By the time the twin sons of Xyrium rose over the crystal towers, the entire royal court had already heard the Queen's new order. Elias Grant was to be invited back to the palace for diplomatic talks. The words sounded polite, but everyone understood their true meaning. It was an attempt to pull him back into the court's control. The Queen dressed with care that morning. choosing her deep emerald robe threaded with silver lines of authority. She had decided that the meeting would be private, no open court. No witnesses to see if the human held his ground again. Her daughter, however, had other plans. Princess Lorona sat in her chamber, letting the light from the high windows fall. Across her face, she told her attendants, "If the human returns, I will finish what I started." Her tone was confident, but in the quiet moments between words, she found herself picturing his calm expression. The way he had simply walked away as if she were not worth the effort, that thought burned her more than any insult. The Queen's message was sent at dawn through official channels. It was polite, even respectful. The royal court requests your presence for discussions on matters of mutual interest. It read. But in the human ship, Elias glanced at the message, let it sit for exactly 10 minutes, and then sent back a reply that made the palace pause. Declined prior engagements. The refusal hit the court like a crack of thunder. Some nobles gasped in disbelief. Others laughed nervously. No one refused an invitation from the Queen, not openly. It was more than a diplomatic insult, it was a warning. That morning, whispers rippled through the marble corridors. The human has declined, they said. Who does he think he is? But beneath the outrage, there was something else. Sunnis. The Queen did not show her reaction in public, but in private, she paced her chamber. Her fingers tapping the armrest of her chair, she could feel the shift in power. It was small, but real. Each time the human refused to play their game, the court lost a little more control. Lorona, upon hearing the refusal, forced a laugh loud enough for her attendants to hear. Of course he declined. He knows he cannot stand against me in words. But after they left, she walked to the balcony, gripping the stone rail, her eyes scanning the distant docks where the human ship was hidden among the merchant vessels. By midday, merchants and travelers at the docks had begun telling their own version of the story. They claimed the human envoy had refused to meet the Queen because he was already winning us. Some said he was part of a secret mission. Others said he had a warship waiting in the shadows. In the throne room, the Queen finally spoke to her closest advisor. He wants us to chase him, she said softly. And every time we do, he chooses when and how to answer. The advisor asked, shall we send guards to bring him here by force? The Queen shook her head. No, not yet. Earth would take it as an act of war. Instead, she decided to change her approach. She would not demand, she would tempt. A new message was sent, this time not from the Queen, but from the Minister of Trade, offering an exclusive negotiation on rare mineral rights, something Earth's fleets would value highly. Elias read the new message in silence, the faintest smile tugging at the corner of his lips. He didn't reply immediately. Instead, he tapped his COM unit twice, sending a coded signal into deep space, far beyond the reach of Zyrian sensors, somewhere out there in the cold dark. Something received a signal and began to move. In the palace, Lorona grew restless. Her usual audience of admirers could not distract her from the thought of the human ignoring her. She began to wonder, was it possible he had walked away because he simply didn't care about her or the court? The idea was both insulting and strangely unsettling. By evening, a messenger returned from the human ship with an answer was polite. But again, it was not what they expected. I will consider your proposal, it read, short, without flourish. The kind of message that left the receiver feeling as though they had been dismissed. The Queen's hands tightened slightly on the message scroll. She knew what was happening now. This was not a man who was losing control of the game. This was a man who was changing the game entirely. And in the streets below the palace, among the common people, the human's legend grew with every telling. They spoke of the envoy who did not bow, who did not argue, who simply walked away and made the most powerful court in the galaxy follow him. That night, as the palace slept, the Queen stood by her window, her eyes fixed on the dark horizon. She could not see the human warship drifting in stealth beyond her world. But somehow she felt its presence, waiting, watching, and ready, and somewhere in the docking bay, inside the small, quiet human ship, Elias Grant closed his eyes for the first time in days, knowing that by refusing twice, it made the court more desperate than they realized. And desperation was always the beginning of a mistake. 3 days after Elias's second refusal, the skies of Xyrian were clear, the twin suns casting gold light over the crystal towers and floating markets. Life in the capital moved as usual, merchants shouting prices, airships gliding between tall spires, nobles riding in their sleek hover carriages, but all of it stopped when a shadow fell over the city. At first, people thought it was a passing freighter. But then the shadow grew, stretching across the palace gardens, the towers, and the entire royal courtyard. Eyes turned upward, mouths falling open, a massive shape emerged from the blue, its hull black as midnight, absorbing the sunlight instead of reflecting it. It moved without sound, but its presence pressed against the air like the weight of a storm. The shape grew sharper as it descended into the upper atmosphere, and the people began to whisper, "Human warship." Someone breathed. The words spread like fire, from the market stalls to the palace gates in the throne room. A guard burst in without protocol. "Majesty, an unidentified vessel has entered orbit." His voice trembled despite years of military training. The queen rose from her throne, her eyes narrowing. "Show me the Great Wall of the Council." Chamber turned into a viewing screen. The black warship filled the display, dwarfing even the largest Xyrian fleet ships. Its surface was smooth, broken only by sharp lines and glowing points of pale blue light. Princess Lorona entered. Drawn by the commotion, she stopped when she saw the image, her lips parting in surprise. "That's human?" she asked, her voice softer than she intended. One of the generals answered, "Yes, and it is not broadcasting any identification codes." The warship hung there in the sky like a predator that did not need to hunt. Its silence was more threatening than a barrage of weapons. The queen turned to her generals. "Has it made contact?" The reply came quickly. "No, Majesty, it is simply watching." In the streets below, ordinary citizens gathered, pointing at the black shape above, some in fear, others in awe. Children stared wide-eyed. Elders muttered old warnings about Deathworlders and their dangerous ships. In the docking bay on the city's edge, Elias stood on the roof of his small ship, the wind whipping against his coat. He looked up at the warship, his face unreadable. It was close enough now that the markings on its hull could be seen, 3 simple white lines, the symbol of Earth's first fleet. His comm unit buzzed once. He tapped it. A familiar voice came through. "On station, awaiting your word." Elias replied calmly, "Hold position, maintain silence," then shut it off without another word. In the palace, the queen held a quick council. Her advisors were divided. Some urged her to demand the warship leave immediately. Others warned that provoking it without knowing its full capabilities would be suicide. Lorona listened in silence, her eyes fixed on the screen, her earlier confidence now tangled with something else. Curiosity. News traveled fast. By midday, every noble in the city knew about the human ship. Rumors spreads. Some said it was here for revenge. Others claimed it was a warning, a reminder that humans never traveled alone. Finally, a message came. Not from the warship, but from Elias himself. It was addressed to the queen, short and precise. "We will speak when respect is mutual." There was no title, no formal greeting. Yet the weight of the words hit harder than any insult. The queen read the message twice, her fingers curling slightly against the parchment. She had faced warlords and smugglers, pirates and rebels, but never someone who could make her court hesitate with just a few words. Lorona leaned toward her mother, her voice quiet. "We cannot ignore this." The queen looked at her. "We will not. But we will move on his terms, not because we bow to him, but because the galaxy is watching outside." The massive human warship slowly rotated in the sky, its movement deliberate, like a great beast turning its head. The sunlight caught along. It sighed, revealing rows of recessed weapon ports, silent but ready. Elias stayed on the docking platform until nightfall, watching the warship hold its place over the city. He knew the court was already changing its tone. The silence of the warship was speaking louder than any declaration, and now? It was only a matter of time before they asked him back, this time with their pride swallowed, and high above the alien world, on the bridge of the warship. The human captain stood with his hands behind his back, his crew working quietly around. He'll call soon, the captain said, his voice certain. They always do. The summons from the queen arrived at dawn. But this time, it was not written in the sharp, commanding tone of the first message. It was short, careful, and heavy with formality. "The royal court requests your presence for private negotiations at the throne." The words were polite. But everyone in the palace knew they were closer to an admission of defeat than an order. Elias read the message without reaction, then set it aside. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he walked to the small metal case on his desk and opened. Inside lay a folded black can-silver uniform, the formal dress of Earth Defense Command. The uniform he had worn on the bridge of warships in times when a single wrong move could start a war. When he stepped out of his ship, the city docks fell silent. No longer was he alone. Behind him moved 6 human soldiers in full combat armor. Their visors dark, their weapons slung but ready, they walked in perfect step, the kind of discipline that made even seasoned alien guards tense. Word spread faster than the soldiers could walk. The human is coming. With his warriors, voices whispered through the streets. Merchants left their stalls to watch from a distance. Children pressed against walls, eyes wide at the sight of the black armored figures. At the palace gates, the guards straightened. But not one dared raise a weapon. The captain of the guard swallowed hard. Stepping aside without being told, Elias walked through without slowing, his boots striking the marble floor with a rhythm that echoed down the long halls. The soldiers behind him matched his pace perfectly. In the throne room, the queen sat high in her seat, her emerald robe flowing like liquid light. But there was no mistaking the stiffness in her shoulders. Beside her, Princess Lirana's expression was unreadable, though her fingers curled slightly around the armrest as the sound of approaching footsteps filled the chamber. When the tall doors opened, the court fell into a hush. Every noble's gaze locked on the Sidelius Grant walking down the center aisle, flanked by soldiers who moved with the silence of predators. He did not bow, he did not greet them. He stopped a few steps short of the throne and simply said, "Now we talk." His voice calm, even, but in the quiet of the hall, it felt like a challenge. The queen leaned forward slightly. "Captain Grant," she began, choosing her words with care, "we have matters to discuss." Her tone was softer now, a far cry from the amused superiority of their first meeting. Elias didn't reply right away. His eyes scanned the room, noting every face, every shift in posture. The nobles who once laughed now avoided his gaze. Lirana's eyes met his for the briefest moment before she looked away. The queen gestured toward the council chamber. "We will speak in private." But Elias didn't move. Instead, he tilted his head slightly. "We'll speak here." His voice carried no anger, no heat, but the firmness in it made the room seem smaller. After a moment's pause, the queen nodded, hiding the fact that she had just given ground in front of her entire court. The negotiations began, but it was Elias who set the pace. Every proposal from the queen was met with silence until she rephrased it in terms that favored Earth. He spoke little, but every word he did say carried weight. When he agreed, it was final. When he refused, there was no argument. The court watched in silence, a strange reversal from days before. When they had mocked him openly, now the air was heavy with the knowledge that the man standing before them was not a supplicant, but an equal, perhaps even the one holding the stronger hand. At one point, Princess Lorona finally spoke, her voice carefully measured. "It seems you have brought your warriors too. Impress us." Elias's gaze shifted to her. His reply, quiet but sharp. "If I wanted to impress you, Princess, you'd already know." The words hung in the air like a blade, and for the first time, she had no reply. By the time the discussion ended, trade agreements had been signed, defense pacts arranged, and every term leaned in favor of Earth. The Queen's signature on the final document felt like the closing of a trap she had not realized was set the day her daughter mocked him. When Elias turned to leave, his soldiers followed without a word. The nobles parted to let them pass, none daring to meet his eyes. And though no one spoke it aloud, they all knew when the human had walked away the first time. It was not retreat, it was strategy. Today proved it. As the throne room doors closed behind him, the silence that remained was not one of shock or humiliation, but of something far more dangerous: respect, and, perhaps, fear. The morning after the negotiations, the skies over Xyrian were quiet again. The massive human warship still hung above the city like a silent moon, its black hull reflecting nothing. Its engines dark and still, but its presence felt heavier than ever. Inside the palace, the Queen sat in her private chamber. The signed agreements spread out on the table before her, the ink still fresh. She traced her fingers over the human seal at the bottom, her thoughts unsettled. She had gained what she wanted: trade routes, defensive pacts, but at the cost of giving the human exactly what he wanted as well, and she knew. It had been his design from the beginning. In another wing of the palace, Princess Leorona stood before her mirror, her attendants fastening a new gown, but she barely noticed their work. Her mind kept returning to his voice, that calm, measured tone that had cut deeper than any insult. She had mocked him before the court, and he had answered not with words, but with silence, power, and precision. The thought made her jaw tighten, not from hatred, but from a reluctant, almost dangerous respect. At the city's main docking bay, Elias and his soldiers prepared to depart. The people gathered at the barriers, merchants, workers, even children, all craning their necks to see the human who had walked into the royal court alone and left with the galaxy's most arrogant rulers sitting silent. They did not cheer, they did not call his name, but the way they stood and watched eyes wide, expression sober, was louder than any applause. One of the human soldiers glanced at Elias's orders. "Sir?" Elias's gaze swept across the alien city one last time. "We're done here," he said simply. Back in the palace, the Queen received a final message from Elias's ship. It was not long, only 3 words: mutual respect achieved. There was no threat, no demand, no boast. And yet it was the most cutting farewell she had ever received, because it carried the unspoken truth: he had come to their world, faced their power, and left on his own terms. The warship above began to move, its engines lighting with a low, distant hum. The shadow it cast shifted across the city, climbing slowly off the palace walls. People tilted their heads upward, watching it rise higher into the atmosphere, until it was only a dark outline against the twin suns. Princess Lorona stepped out onto her balcony, the warm wind tugging at her hair. She watched the black silhouette fade into the stars, and for the first time in her life, she felt the strange pull of wanting to meet someone again, not to defeat them, but to understand them, though she would never admit it aloud. In the council chamber, nobles whispered about the future. If this is what one human can do, what would an entire fleet be capable of? Some asked in fear, others in awe. One elder courtier said quietly. "We should be grateful it was this man who came, and not another, far above the planet." In the command center of the human warship, Elias stood beside the captain, the stars stretching out before them. "Course, sir?" The captain asked. Elias's eyes stayed on the fading light of Xyrian behind them. "Forward," he said, "always forward," as the warship slipped into the dark. The story of the silent human began to spread not from official records, but from the mouths of those who had seen it in markets and spaceports, in taverns and military outposts. They told of the envoy who had been mocked before the galaxy's proudest court, who had turned his back without a word, and who had returned days later with a shadow so vast it silenced them all. Some called it a lesson in patience, others a warning about underestimating humans, but all agreed on one thing no one who had been in that court would ever forget the sound of his footsteps as he walked away that first day, or the weight of his presence when he returned. And somewhere deep in space, Captain Elias Grant sat in his quarters, the hum of the ship around him, his hands resting calmly on the table. He knew this would not be the last time a proud empire tried to measure humanity by outdated ideas, and he also knew that when they did, he would be ready to walk away again, because sometimes walking away was not surrender, it was the first move in winning the whole game.